In my constant search for hidden indie gems, if there's one thing I've realised, it is that any serious developer should never underprice their game. Too many times I've seen pretty good or at least enjoyable games being priced at €5 or less and getting stuck smack bang in the middle of the trash heap of half-made builds and asset flips, often getting drowned by them. In the cesspool that is Steam's marketplace right now, serious developers need to make a statement of confidence with their products, and the price is a very important factor in that. It can change how the game is perceived by potential buyers, and with that, make a big difference to the visibility of it. And the game we're looking at today is one example where such a statement should be made. Tenebrous Dungeon is an old school FPS game that is designed and played in a similar fashion to Wolfenstein 3D, as opposed to the more favoured inspirational approach of Doom or Quake. It is developed and published by indie developer Apathus Software. It released on Steam February 28, 2019 and is priced at €3.99. Despite its crude visual appearance, Tenebrous Dungeon is a solid, well-designed and enjoyable old-school FPS game that attempts to add a few new twists to the Wolfenstein 3D format, but some of those new ideas are in need of some refinement. In Tenebrous Dungeon, you take on the role of a warrior who has been sent on a mission by his king to stop the self-proclaimed King of the Tenebrous Highlands, Bartholomew Black, from starting an uprising that will engulf the entire kingdom into war. Your mission is to get into the Tenebrous Keep through the dungeons and make your way to the keep itself and find Bartholomew and kill him before he can put his plans to action. Succeed and you will be hailed as the new Lord of Tenebrous Keep. Like with all old school FPS games, the general plot itself is very simple and doesn't have much to tell, a simple objective of find and kill the bad guy. But unlike other such FPS games, there's plenty of backstory and history to be found for those looking to sink their teeth into some lore, and not much is left untold. From the history of the keep itself to the rise of Bartholomew Black to everything in between, there's plenty of lore to be found that come in the form of mostly journals and letters you find on your travels. The writing of these pieces of lore is very well written and paced, all the while being quite interesting to read. It even covers the questions of how goblins and demons came to be in the keep, and allied with the king, leaving all potential plot holes well and truly filled. So while the game has all the old school action that fans of the genre look for, it has also plenty of stories to tell, giving the game something for everyone to enjoy. The gameplay to Tenebrous Dungeon is exactly what you'd expect from a game that is inspired by Wolfenstein 3D. The objective is to progress through each level, killing anything that stands in your path, unlocking different coloured doors, in this game's case by finding coloured levers instead of keys, and finding secrets. But as previously stated, Tenebrous Dungeon has a few unique twists of its own that give it its own identity. As you progress through each level, you will gain points, just like in Wolfenstein, along with experience points which are used as a part of a basic RPG system. Points are gained from killing enemies, finding treasure items such as gems and chalices, along with gaining bonus points at the end of a level for total enemies killed, secrets found, and completing the level within a certain time. You can also obtain points by salvaging unwanted weapons you find. The point system works exactly like that of Wolfenstein, and is there solely for bragging rights over having any functionality. Your total points at the end of the game will be displayed on the leaderboard on the main menu, though this is only a local leaderboard and does not have any online functions. While not to everyone's taste, the addition of the points system is a nice touch. It allows for some old school friendly competition between the family and friends, along with some replayability for those who like to go through the game again and beat their previous score. It is a small detail, but a welcoming one nevertheless. Experience points on the other hand are gained from killing enemies or by salvaging unwanted weapons for experience instead of the points. Experience is used to level up your character. Upon leveling up you will gain a skill point that can be distributed into one of three stats. Those stats being health, melee damage and range damage. Each point increases your health by 5, while for the two damage types each point increases them by 2. It is as basic as an RPG system gets, and other such games of the genre have done it in more depth, such as Project Warlock. Nevertheless, it still adds to the game, giving it a bit more depth along with some basic character development. The most you will reach is level 9 by the end of the game, but the small increases to your stats do make a difference, making it worthwhile. It is a system that won't blow you away, but it is perfectly functional. As for the combat itself, it works a bit different to that of other games. In Tenebrous Dungeon you use both ranged and melee combat, and you can only have one of each weapon type equipped at any one time. Ranged weapons include various bows, crossbows and staves, while melee weapons include daggers, swords, axes and the likes. Each weapon has its own stats, which are attack speed and damage. For ranged weapons, crossbows are slower but do higher damage, and you can use your melee weapon at any time. The same applies to staves. Bows however are faster and have a higher ammo count but do less damage, and you can't use your melee attack while an arrow is loaded. Melee weapons are the same in that they have their own damage and attack speed stats too, where more speed means less damage and vice versa. These stats give a sense of strategy to the combat, where you need to decide whether you want power over speed or speed over power, with each being useful in specific circumstances. So finding and using the right weapon at the right time can make a big difference in certain scenarios, adding to the depth of what is otherwise a basic enough combat system. With ranged weapons in Tenebrous Dungeon, you need to manually load the ammunition into the weapons. So for example, when you fire a crossbow, you will need to click the fire button again to load the next bolt before being able to fire again. The same applies to bows, where you need to load a new arrow before being able to fire again. It is a nice little touch that may not seem necessary, but it really adds to the combat, giving it some weight that would otherwise be missing. Not to mention a sense of realism too. The issue here is that you're unable to use melee weapons with a loaded bow, which isn't very well explained in the tutorials at the start of the game. It states that you cannot use your melee when using two-handed weapons. It should explain that you can't use melee attacks when you have the bow loaded with an arrow. It results in it being confusing until you figure it out for yourself. Another issue is the melee combat in general. With how it is designed, you can't actually attack an enemy in melee without getting struck yourself in the process. Therefore, it is more of a last resort or a way of conserving ammo by dealing the killing blow to an enemy as opposed to it actually being a form of attack. Because of this, the melee stat for leveling up is made practically redundant, as it is only used when you are out of ammo. Other than that, however, it works well and adds to the game. The major problem, however, with the combat and weapons is that most of the weapons you find are randomly generated into the game. How this works is that each time you smash a barrel or kill an enemy, there is a chance of a weapon spawning. The issue is that the number of weapons that spawn go on massive swings, of there being either too many or too few. What ends up happening because of this is sometimes you can go ages in a level without a single ranged weapon spawning, leaving you having to use your melee weapon. And because of the way the melee is designed as a last resort, if you don't find any ranged weapons, you are screwed, and end up having to start the level over from scratch. It led to 3 or 4 very frustrating deaths for me that were completely out of my control. It can at times be quite anger inducing because of the radical RNG of weapon spawning. Another very minor issue with the weapons in combat is that if you walk over a ranged weapon type that is exactly the same as you're holding, your ammo will be replenished to the maximum. The problem is that there is no way of telling how much ammo is left without picking up the weapon. A small number with the screen prompt that appears when near a weapon to say how much ammo is left would be great. Aside from those issues, the weapons and their workings are all fun and enjoyable to use from start to finish. Along with the weapons, there are also other pickups called Stimulants. These stimulants temporarily affect your stats in both a negative and positive way. One will increase your health and melee power but will lower your range damage. Others will do the opposite, while some can be poisonous. There are also potions to be found in the latter half of the game that works in the same way but only gives positive effects, making them much safer to use. The stimulants and potions are a nice addition and are the only way you can get your health above the maximum. But there are 2 issues that come with them. The first is that you cannot finish a level while a stimulant or potion is active. A barrier will form around the door, stopping you from progressing. It is a needless precaution. The only purpose I can think of is that exiting a level with the stimulant active was causing the game to crash or bug out. Stopping the player exiting the level was the only way they could find around it. If that is how it came to be, it worked, but it slows down the gameplay having to wait for a stimulant to wear off before progressing to the next level. The second issue is where one of the stimulants can cause some really unfair deaths. The stimulant I'm referring to is the Pixie Leaf, which increases your health by 5 but also lowers your speed by 5. Having your speed lowered this much results in you moving at a snail's pace. Accidentally walking on one of those as you backpedal and picking it up can lead to a very quick death, as you have no way of escaping any enemies that are charging towards you. Most of the times I died outside of being because of no ranged weapons spawning was because of the Pixie Leaf. It is such a pointless item and one that causes nothing but unfair problems, and ultimately needs to be removed from the game. Right now in its current form, all it brings is utter frustration. Aside from that, however, the stimulants and the potions are a nice addition to the game, where picking up the right one at the right time can really get you out of a tight spot. As for the enemies in the combat, they are pretty basic as far as AI goes. Enemies consist of pure close ranged attacks or a mixture of close and ranged attacks. There's no special attacks as such and all enemies pretty much just charge straight towards you, even the ranged ones. But to make up for this very basic AI is a very well balanced difficulty spike. Slowly as you progress through the game, enemies get slightly more powerful as new ones are introduced, adding a slight increase to the difficulty but nothing so drastic that it becomes obnoxious. So while the enemy's AI may be as basic as it gets, the increase in difficulty keeps things interesting. There are also bosses to face every so often too, which are much stronger and more powerful compared to the standard enemies, with the tactics to beat them often being to fire a few shots before turning around and running a bit to keep your distance before firing another few. A basic tactic, but a very effective one. For what the enemies and bosses lack in intelligence, they more than make up for with clever balancing, keeping the early 90s retro theme of the game all the while interesting to face off against throughout the game. They may not look like much from the trailer, but they are still enjoyable to fight. Then there is the secrets. Each level has a certain amount of secrets to be found, each one containing mostly treasure for extra points, but occasionally you'll find food for health and additional weapons. These are found by pressing the interact key against an out of place part of the wall, which will then open the secret door. Most of the secrets can be easily spotted using the minimap, where they're located in what looks like a room on the map that has no doors, so they're easy to find in most cases. But occasionally you will find secrets within secrets. As always with these games, they're fun to seek out and find for extra supplies, and with the point system, if you're having a friendly competition, they are ever more important to find. How they're designed in Tenebrous Dungeon isn't unique, but very much pays homage to those from the game it inspires from most. Like with all old school FPS games, there are multiple difficulty levels to choose from. In Tenebrous Dungeon's case, Invader, Knight and Warlord. Invader is easy, Knight is medium and Warlord is hard. The higher the difficulty level, the more enemies are present in a level, along with having more health and dealing more damage. So whether you're a first time player of these old school FPS or a long time veteran, there is a difficulty option to cater for all. As a whole, the gameplay of Tenebrous Dungeon is good. It is fun, very playable, and the developer's own little twists, while needing some refinement, are nice touches that make a very old and somewhat tired format feel refreshing. The combat and how it works is solid enough and a nice little variation to the standard, but it does need some work with the radical behaviour of the RNG with weapon spawning, while the stimulants work well, but the pixie leaf needs to either be removed entirely or adjusted greatly. The RPG system, while at the most basic possible, does add at least some character development to the game, adding to the overall experience. Despite the many similarities to Wolfenstein 3D, the developer has done a great job at incorporating their own ideas to not just separate the game from that of which it inspires from, but from other such titles on the market. The ideas aren't perfect, but are a great starting point for refinement in future games. Tenebrous Dungeon may be slightly slower paced to other old school shooters, but the solid combat and modern twists make it a breath of fresh air where you feel you're playing something completely different despite its similarities. It is a joy from beginning to end. The level design to Tenebrous Dungeon is exactly like that of Wolfenstein 3D. Each level is a single floored map consisting of corridors and separated rooms, something that would generally be considered boring level design. However, to liven up the level design, the developer has quite a few different environments in the game that change on a regular occurrence. The further in the game you progress, the more often the environments change. From basic dungeon stone walls to graveyards and hedge mazes to magical laboratories and a throne room, just to name a few. There is plenty of new environments to experience that keeps the game visually pleasing throughout and the level design refreshing. Thanks to the consistent change, never did I tire of the basic layouts or feel I was travelling through familiar ground. This is something that is very difficult to do with such a retro design, as if not done properly, the gameplay can become very monotonous. But that isn't the case here, and no matter how long you've been playing, you will continue to feel the same excitement you do from the start to the very end. Everything about Tenebrous Dungeon is an homage to the very early 90s FPS. The visuals, the level design, and most of all the soundtrack and atmosphere. Throughout the entire game, you feel like you're playing something from the early 90s. It is fantastic in that regard, and the soundtrack has all the retro notes to it, like you're playing such a game too. Throughout the game, the soundtrack starts off light while having some old school horror tones going through it, but the further you progress in the game, the more the soundtrack intensifies with urgency. With each new environment comes new notes and tones to the soundtrack, making you feel like you're getting closer and closer to your goal and the evil you've come to defeat. I wouldn't say the soundtrack amplifies the atmosphere greatly or changes to mix in with the environment specifically, but it does add that urgency and intensity as you progress. Nevertheless, the one thing it does amplify is that you're playing something that is a love letter to the FPS of the 90s, and despite its simplicity, there is a catchiness to its tune that you won't be able to get out of your head for some time. As a whole, the atmosphere isn't great, but certainly good. When I found Tenebrous Dungeon stuck in the middle of countless amounts of crap on Steam's release lists, I was skeptical, especially with the price. If I'm to be honest, I wasn't expecting much at all, just another half-assed cash grab on an old school shooter. But what I ended up finding was a very surprisingly competent game, that not only pays utmost homage to the shooters of the early 90s, but one that is bold, brave, well designed, and most of all, fun to play. It isn't perfect, and needs some refinement before I could call it a great game, but it is certainly a good one that is worth more than just the asking price of €3.99, and with that, I give Tenebrous Dungeon a 7 out of 10. There may be better Wolfenstein-esque games out there. The previously mentioned Project Warlock is a perfect example of that. But nevertheless, the decision to change the format in the way that Tenebrous Dungeon does when the developer could have easily just made a half-assed clone, but didn't, is something that deserves respect. And it's such bravery as that has made me respect and become so passionate about the indies, and why I continue to cover them where most others wouldn't.